You're listening to The Modern Workforce, a Skedulo podcast. This is a show for deskless workforce innovators, thinkers, advocates, and educators. You're about to hear an interview about frontline worker focus, trends in the mobile workforce, and more. Let's get into the show.
So the past 2 years of distributed work and accelerated digital transformation have changed the way we work for the better, I think. Namely, today's knowledge workers benefit from unprecedented levels of autonomy and flexibility. But at the same time, workers who sit at a desk in a traditional office are increasingly rare and currently account for just 1 of every 5 employees around the world. So it got me thinking about the other 80% of the global workforce is deskless, traveling and operating in the field. So given these changes, I really wanted to talk to somebody who talks to our customers a lot, who manage deskless productivity worker leaders. And that guy's name is Paul Ciappara. He's my guest today at Skedulo, and he leads customer insights and product strategy at Skedulo. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And he's also a new dad. So he just had a baby. How many days ago?
He is 15 days old now.
15 days. All right.
15 days. Yeah, real
Third
fresh.
week. Awesome.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Congratulations. Actually, second
Thank
week.
you very much.
Third work week, but second week.
That's right.
So he's working hard at doing what babies do, right?
He certainly is.
Is he deskless? I think he probably is at this point.
Yeah, he is actually. That's it. Yeah, by
so,
definition, right? He certainly is. Yeah.
So I want to have you share with me and our guests what you're seeing as you talk to customers, and have you share the results of our recent Skedulo research paper. Every year we do this thing called State of Deskless Worker Report. We actually talk to not only just leaders, but workers as well, and get their thoughts about their world. So let's get started, shall we?
Let's do it.
So you obviously talk to probably more customers in a meaningful, depthful way about how they think about their workforce, probably more than anybody that I know at Skedulo. And so that you're kind of a natural person to talk to about our topic today. Can you share a little bit with me about what you do here at Skedulo, what your kind of prime directive, if you will, is, and the broader trends and changes you're seeing at companies that are managing their deskless workers?
Absolutely. So, from a what I do perspective, and the first thing I'll sort of say is I came to Skedulo a number of years ago because it was an organization that really reflected upon, engaged with, and looked to learn from their customers, which is, ultimately one of the most customer-centric or human-centric kind of ways of thinking about developing products. So I was naturally drawn to that. And one of the things I love about my job is, as you say, constant engagement with, talking to, observing, and sort of learning from our customers around the problems that they're sort of facing from a scheduling and deskless workforce perspective, but also sort of understanding a lot about what they're seeing and how they're adapting to market changes and how our product can morph and help support that. So my typical day for me would entail talking to anyone from a deskless worker themselves, so someone out in the field conducting this kind of work and really understanding the challenges and what they're going through on a day-to-day basis, right through to sort of execs from organizations and what they're seeing and how they're adapting to and thinking about the business processes and the evolving landscape that is the deskless workforce and the modern sort of deskless workforce. So love the fact that I can do that, and I really love the fact that Skedulo thinks about that and invests within myself the ability to kind of do that and engage with our customers. We feel that we're able to build the best products by talking to and learning from our customers directly, the people who use our technology on a day-to-day basis. That's kind of what I do. You probably
have the second best job at Skedulo after mine, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, I'm gunning for it. David. But
No, this sounds really cool. If you like you have the gift of gab, obviously, and if you get to talk to people outside of your coworkers, and it changes all the time because you get to talk to different kind of people. That's why I started the podcast. Not that I was bored, but it gives you a little more energy around what you do because you can connect to the actual people that you're building stuff for. I feel like you probably makes your job feel a little more purposeful rather than just hanging out with the same people all day long that you work with.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I absolutely love the fact that on a day-to-day basis, I can really connect to the people, the organizations that we are supporting and working with and seeing how our software and how our technology improves the lives or could continue to improve the lives of those. Equally, though, and for the folks that work for Skedulo that don't get that interaction day to day, I love the fact that I can be the conduit to them and help them understand and appreciate how what we're doing and how what we're building is changing their lives for the better. So coming back and telling stories about a deskless worker or a scheduler, and saying this is how the software that you're building is supportive and making their life just so much better is incredibly encouraging for those folks that work for Skedulo that don't get that customer interaction day to day, and also letting them know what we could be doing from an insight perspective or from a product development perspective to improve the product even more, I think is hugely powerful for me personally, but also for us as an organization.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. You can build with purpose because you've seen the purpose and you've seen the output. What are some of the broader trends and changes that you're seeing at companies that are managing their deskless workforce? Can you give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of what you're seeing out there, Paul?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time in the sense that there is a lot happening. It truly is breathtaking, I think, to see the rate of innovation, technology, plugging these gaps in terms of, very manual, outdated mechanisms and ways of managing workforces just in general. So I'm seeing a broad range, certainly, and I think that the pandemic itself, we're always going to kind of go there and talk about this to a certain degree because it's a very prevalent and relevant topic, has sort of course, accelerated or moved us more towards these more distributed, larger workforces. Now, part of those are of course, still desk-based, so, remote workforces. But even more so, I think this is sort of growing, and then the research itself is helping support this, is that there's a growing number of deskless workforces and folks that do work in these kind of deskless manners as well. So more distribution has, I guess, materialized in a couple of different ways for organizations. Some organizations are tackling it by way of sort of more centralized scheduling models where they'll have a central hub that will be a group of schedulers that will sort of manage a distributed deskless workforces. Others are moving more towards probably a little bit more of a decentralized. So they're giving back a little bit more autonomy and kind of flexibility and putting the ability to sort of manage the day-to-day and work and workflow aspects into the hands of the deskless workers themselves. And they're actually seeing a really, really interesting, I guess, set of outcomes as a result of that. Happier workforces, happier customers, as well as sort of, we can kind of unpack that a bit more. The other really interesting thing I think we're seeing is a far more kind of complex tech stack evolving as we sort of look at all these different technologies and the way that technologies sort of interact and connect and integrate with each other. Gone are the kind of days of this is just a simple, maybe CRM with some spreadsheets and away you kind of go. Now we're sort of talking about, various sort of marketing, HR, essential health record management systems, and everything kind of intertwined is proven to be quite a complex ecosystem and technology stack. That definitely I kind of see from a more organizational perspective is starting to really sort of take shape. And then the final really, really interesting thing is just seeing the kind of level of sophistication of technology take shape as well in terms of the use of really interesting things in the deskless workforce space, like augmented reality and artificial intelligence and automation in some of these processes as well is just kind of like really starting to kick off a lot more in terms of it becoming a really important sort of aspect as well. The final thing, which again, and this is a nod, I think, of course, to the research that we're doing with this sort of changing ecosystem and more distributed workforces, definitely one of the trends I'm seeing is a much heavier focus on tools and technology that are supportive of being deskless. So as an example, not lugging around a massive kind of laptop or, paper-based forms these days are moving more towards very, very much, of course, like what Skedulo does. And with that definitely comes this sense of employees and deskless workers yearning for and really being able to adopt and appreciate being a lot more autonomous in what they're doing and certainly having a lot more flexibility. And that flexibility is definitely something that we're seeing come through a number of different research aspects as well.
We did an episode on the augmented reality stuff for manufacturers, Dirk Scow, and In manufacturing, it's actually kind of dangerous to wear some of those headsets because you have to have field of vision. But I could see in other environments where that might be actually super relevant. You pair that with AI, you've got a really powerful, untethered worker. And I think most of us are now used to using our phone first or having it around us all the time. But it kind of hurts when we have to go back to the computer because then we have to sit down and like, this is work, right? But this is, the phone is interesting. So if we could kind of do more of our work on the phone, the way we book rooms or talk to our friends or message everybody, I think that you'll probably get a better engaged workforce that'll feel more autonomous just by the fact that it's a nimble, untethered device. And I know for a fact that not a lot of those systems that have been deployed were deployed in that kind of era.
Yeah, exactly. And really through my observation over time, both with existing Skedulo customers and certainly even non-Skedulo customers, to your point exactly, you sort of see the particular organizations that have taken what arguably was a very desk-based piece of software, and they've just tried to scale it down to something that may or may not necessarily work or fit.
It's not going to work.
The context. Exactly. And you kind of see the pain of these folks using that and being like, it's just not working for us, or it's not congruent to the type of work that we're really doing out in the field.
I love to talk about this company we're working with right now that's a leading healthcare company, and they traditionally saw patients in a clinic for dialysis. And dialysis was a machine-based I'm going to get the word wrong, so I'm not even going to say it. There's two kinds of dialysis. One, you have a catheter in your stomach and the fluid drains out of your stomach. They pump fluid in and then it drains out and your body kind of does the filtration. The other one, you're hooked up to a machine, hemodialysis. And that was what you had to do. You had to go into the dialysis center 3 times a week. And you were tethered to that experience, right? You had to go, if you wanted to travel, you had to go pre-find where you were going to have to be those 3 days a week. And so now they're finding more success and compliance when they have patients in their home doing it on their own, even with a portable machine now. So the technology has gotten better to be transported where you don't have to go into the clinic. Now we have to have mobile nurses and mobile clinicians and mobile support staff. Wait, we're not just scheduling rooms in a clinic and having people come in. Now we have to be far more nimble. We have to put a mobile device that's intelligent. We have to get a hold of the client. So their problem set, they came to us and said, you're the only one that we can find that has this technology that can actually do this. Can you help us do this? And they've rolled it out in a matter of weeks to over 500 clinics. So we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Yeah.
In another podcast, because I want to get people excited. Shifting gears a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about that research. So super good, amazing insights in terms of what's going on in the world right now. So every year I mentioned before at the early part of the episode, the state of deskless worker. It sounds like can I go to the deskless? Can you have a ticket to the Deskless Worker Report? It's a state, right? I love that. State of the Deskless Worker Report. We used a broad panel. And I think there's some similar trends there too. So Paul, can you talk a little bit about the study itself, the recent findings in the report, and we'll, in the second half of the show, we'll get to what those were. But I want to talk about the first 2 findings that talk a little bit about this thing about flexibility and technology. We'll get to autonomy a little bit later. But can you talk a little bit about the background of the study and the flexibility technology dimensions of the findings?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I love, it is funny that the state of the deskless worker for sure, but I love this report and I love what it represents because it's I guess an acknowledgement that deskless workforces have been severely underrepresented in terms of technology investment historically, and possibly even as a result of that have not really warranted any focus in terms of understanding what a day is like for that type of worker and what it sort of means to be deskless and why technology needs to be very deliberately focused around what they're doing. So it's a research piece that we've been running for sort of a couple of years now. I think this year, the combination of interviews and surveys with approximately 500 deskless workers. So those are the folks, that typically serve. They don't sit behind a desk like you and I do. But to balance that, we also do look at surveying or understanding the needs of desk-based workers as well as a bit of a balance and juxtaposition against it. So what's been fascinating, or what's been really sort of interesting to see evolve in terms of the findings, and to think about, or to talk about the sort of first two, flexibility is just such a fascinating find, or something to appreciate in terms of the way a deskless worker runs and moves through their day. And I guess it completely kind of makes sense. Like if you think about you and I, we do sit behind a desk, but we're sort of given a relatively open level, or at least some form of acknowledged level of flexibility and autonomy in what we do. And therefore we feel empowered. We feel like we've got possibly a better, dare I say it, work-life balance where it sort of needs. I mean, we can focus on the things that are important for us whilst also being incredibly kind of productive. And therefore it sort of stands to reason that folks that are deskless yearn for, or really appreciate and understand that those very similar attributes are hugely beneficial for them as well. By nature of the role of being a deskless worker, I've spoken to folks that can feel very isolated. They're sort of out there. There's no connection to an office per se, or to other colleagues at times. So therefore, to be dictated to, or sort of told, here's your work day, do it in that order, no questions kind of asked, and feel as though they've got no ownership of the work that they're doing. I can fully appreciate that may not necessarily be as kind of conducive to a really great working environment as giving, a sense of flexibility. Now, there needs to be a bit of a balance. I appreciate that not all organizations or type of work can have complete kind of levels of flexibility, but, I think it's finding that balance with organizations and deskless workers that's truly, important from this. For sure.
They talked one of the things we found, one of the insights was like 47%. I think that's the stat. I'm rating that. I'm not just making that up. I would get in trouble, right? So 47% of deskless productivity respondents would rather work for an organization providing flexible scheduling over the ability to pay 10% more. So they want, hey, can I get more flexibility in my schedule? I'll take less money for that. And if you look at some of the recent if you dig into some of these recent unionization efforts, you got to be pretty upset with where you work to say, I'm going to start a union, right? Like that. If you look at the history of unions and worker movements, they're usually because the workers are not being treated well, or they don't feel like they're being listened to, or they've been given enough flexibility. Scheduling is like one of the key things. And so they're willing to give up some of that money to say, you know what, I got to be able to take care of my daughter.
I could be able to do the things that I enjoy doing.
Exactly. Right. Like,
yeah.
My partner needs to take today off, or we want to go out to the beach on Fridays.
That's right. Yeah.
You have to tell me 2 weeks ahead of time, rather than tomorrow.
There was a wonderful story, of a deskless worker that had transitioned from, very manual, paper-based spreadsheet, highly, highly structured kind of work days where they were working well over time because work wasn't, they were traveling, vast distances and not in a very efficient and effective manner. And this particular sort of worker spoke to us about, not being able to attend their children's sports games, of an evening or something like that. Exactly. And sort of post implementation and kind of rollout of a tool like Skedulo and Schedule itself brought a lot more order and much more sort of rigor to the way that they conducted their day, and they were able to enjoy the things that are important to them, which was spending time with the family. Like, I mean, that's game changing, I think, in a sense of like what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do here as well.
Great. Well, I want to take a little bit of an ad break, and we'll be right back with our guest, Paul Ciappara. At Skedulo, we're on a mission to serve the 2.7 billion workers and those who employ them that don't regularly work from a desk. We know it can be complicated to manage a deskless workforce, but you know what? Your employees and customers, they don't need to know that. Deskless Productivity Cloud, Skedulo, enables any organization to schedule, manage, engage, and analyze their mobile workforce. Visit us at skedulo.com for more information. So welcome back. My guest today is Paul Ciappara. Paul is the Director of Customer Insights and Product Strategy at Skedulo. I like that title. It's really cool. It's a lot. It's got two parts, right? If you don't like one part, you can talk about the other.
Right? There is a lot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not doing well on that part today. Exactly. I'll switch to the other.
So we were talking about our Deskless Productivity Report. We already covered what you're seeing in the market. We talked about the importance of flexibility and that blade of keeping your workers engaged and giving them enough flexibility to do their job, but also making sure they have the ability to show up on time and do their work well and be engaged and not feel like they're being controlled by technology. So there's been a lot of news around worker autonomy, and that's a little bit different than flexibility. And the role of technology can have both good and bad. And the very real ways workers are speaking up to unionize, which is kind of, I think, of a signal about the fact that workers don't feel like they have autonomy. In previously ununionized places like Amazon and Starbucks, and if you look at kind of two different companies, also UPS, very unionized, FedEx, contractors, subcontractors, and FedEx has notably been having a lot more problems with their workforce. UPS doesn't. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm just saying, if you think about that, one way you could say autonomy might have an impact there. So clearly unionized workers actually believe they have, and they often do have a little more autonomy because the playing field, if you will, is a little more even than it is in a non-unionized workforce. And they also talk about this thing called purpose-based technology. So can you talk a little bit about what the report said about autonomy and this purpose-based technology and how workers are thinking about autonomy?
I think you're right in terms of the connection, or certainly the parallels between flexibility and autonomy. Where I think this sort of connective tissue is between this lack of purpose-built technology is that it has a very kind of negative impact on worker productivity. So alluding back to the research report, it was kind of found that about 17% of deskless respondents acknowledged that their organizations use 100% fully digital kind of process. Now that's up from the last sort of research report, but despite that, 83% of respondents are still using paper processes at some capacity. Now, we know through this research, through sort of discovery and observation, that the use of technology to be more supportive of the types of work that these folks are doing has a positive effect on how autonomy and sort of flexibility and retention in those folks feel. So workers feel more empowered, job satisfaction is sort of up, which ultimately means, you're going to retain happier, more satisfied employees as well. So the research itself showed that 89% of deskless workers are either very or somewhat satisfied with their current job, but over half of respondents plan to find a new job within the next sort of 6 months to 2 years.
So they're being tempted already to go somewhere else.
Exactly.
Interesting. What about the ones that felt like they were using good technology? So what we call like purpose-built technology. Did they have a different insight? Did they have a different feeling about their job?
Yeah, they definitely did. So again, this is where the concept, I guess, or the feeling of having a lot more autonomy or control over being owners of the domain of their day played into it. So those employees that actually felt that they had sufficient technology, or certainly a technology that was supportive of giving them a lot more autonomy, were actually far more likely, in fact, about 44% more likely to be sort of satisfied with the work that they were doing and the job that they were sort of conducting on a day-to-day basis. So there's a sort of very strong correlation to the tools and technology and software that supports that level of kind of autonomy. And again, relaying that back a little bit to sort of flexibility, and then being really sort of satisfied with the work that they're doing. And again, I'll allude to the fact that makes sense because, as I said, you and I, we're desk-bound workers, but we're given a sense of purpose, autonomy, ownership of our day. That means we're far more productive. It means we really enjoy the work that we're doing and that we feel like we've got ownership over that work as well.
I think this is a pretty powerful insight, just because when managers think about software and how to run their business, they think of it as a way to kind of operationally improve the efficiency of the organization. And they're going to give them more control over decisions that are being made in the organization. And that's really at odds, you would think, with like, we could just squeeze more productivity by making people work harder and faster and make sure they get their jobs done on time and with quality and the customers are happy and all this other kind of stuff. But this says the opposite. This says, hey, if you give workers that are technology that's more purpose-built, that helps them do their job, gives them more autonomy, the right level of autonomy to decide whether they want to take a job or not that day, whether they want to work that day or not. We can talk about that in a minute. They actually want to stay longer. I think the report says that if people who are more satisfied with their job because they have more empowered technology, they probably want to stay over the next 5 years. And one of the ways we do this, I don't want to do too commercially here, but one of the ways I thought that would demonstrate this is offers. Can you talk a little bit about offers and how that kind of personifies this idea of autonomy?
We kind of had, I guess, a bit of a hypothesis or a hunch within the product that this autonomy or sort of scheduling ownership was a bit of a balancing act. And, one way, of course, to schedule a workforce is to prescribe the kind of work that they're going to do. And, hey, David, here is 9 jobs that I want you to do during this day. Kind of go forth and do them. The focus that we took in terms of flipping that on its head was through what we kind of call work offers. So that's really where you might, as an organization, you've got a fairly dynamic both workforce and the model of sort of work that's happening. You offer the work out to the folks that sit within your Deskless workforce kind of portfolio, I guess, to put it that way. And work can be, for lack of a better term, chosen or selected that fits within perhaps the way a Deskless worker has sort of structured their day. So, a work offer might go out and someone who is either close to that job or knows the patient or the client or the work itself can pick that work up and go, actually, you know what? I've been there before. I'd love to go kind of back there again and do it again. So that's kind of one permutation.
And they get the choice. They get the choice.
Exactly.
To take that job the choice. Or not, or even work today or not.
Spot
right?
on. Yeah, exactly right.
Wow.
These on-demand workforce structures, I think, are very, very attuned to this kind of way of working, whereas there's full acknowledgement that this is not the way that every organization works, right? We know that in high acute kind of patient care, we don't always have the luxury of hey, here's a piece of work, kind of take it or leave it. But certainly in some of the different areas of workforces and different organizations, this is proving to be a really, really valuable and mechanism to retain and keep employees engaged, happy, and doing the kind of work that's really fulfilling to them. So that work offers for us is absolutely one of the ways we're looking to address and think about autonomy. The other really interesting thing I think about Skedulo and the way we think about managing and helping manage these Deskless workforces is, whilst it's important and of course we acknowledge that giving Deskless workers a certain degree of autonomy and kind of ownership of the day, for some organizations, that's a really interesting one of like, how do I still retain a sense of visibility across what the workforce is doing? Because at the end of the day, they have obligations to sort of talk to and stay connected to their customers and drive sort of the bottom line type organizational structure. So a tool like Skedulo balances that need with still providing visibility from a scheduler's perspective. They know what's happening amongst the workforce. They know who's delivering what sort of piece of work, who is where at what particular time. So they feel like there is still a sense of control, but still giving Deskless workers, that opportunity to own their day and not always have to be on the phone or texting or reporting back, tethered back to the office exactly. So it's a win-win kind of on both parts there, and a win-win-win if you even then think about the end customer experience in that as well.
Well, once again, I've learned something new, more than just what I'm supposed to be learning. I learned about the usage of whilst.
Okay.
Am I pronouncing that word right? Whilst?
Whilst. That's correct.
I'm going to use that.
Whilst.
I love that. It makes me feel fancy and better all the time. I want to thank my guest, Paul Ciappara, who called in all the way from beautiful Australia. He's the Director of Customer Insights and Product Strategy at Skedulo. And I just think I learned a lot. I learned a ton today, and I want to wish you well and your family well with your new addition, Sebastian. Is that his name?
Thank you, David. Sebastian.
What a wonderful,
correct,
beautiful
yes.
name. That's your job as a parent, right? Just give the.
That's right. We've got
name.
one. Give them a name that they'll grow into. So
exactly,
yeah, little Sebastian.
So many options with that, right? All right. Hey, thanks, Paul. Have a great week, and we'll come back and talk more. All right.
Thanks, David. Sounds good.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Modern Workforce, the podcast for Deskless workforce innovators by Skedulo. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast